The glass doors of Madison Square Mall slid open with a soft whoosh, and Aaliyah Brooks stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished tile floor, a subtle rhythm that mirrored her calm confidence. She carried herself like she belonged, because she did, but the tension in the air didn't seem to notice. The boutique she owned, Eclat Designs, was tucked near the center of the mall, its window displays shimmering with bespoke dresses and carefully curated accessories. Yet as she made her way past the crowded corridor, two uniformed police officers turned sharply toward her, their eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Officer Mark Reynolds, his voice clipped, almost rehearsed. Aaliyah paused, glancing up, and felt the familiar knot of tension in her chest that came whenever her skin made her a target before her presence ever did. Officer James Carter stepped forward, hands on his belt, his gaze scanning her from head to toe as if she had a target painted on her back. "We've had reports of suspicious behavior in the area," Reynolds continued, his tone polite but edged with accusation. Around them, shoppers slowed, some pulling out phones, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Aaliyah took a measured breath, her mind racing through all the ways this encounter could go wrong, yet her posture remained perfect, her eyes steady and calm. "I'm the owner of this store," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the surrounding crowd. Reynolds frowned slightly, as if hearing her words for the first time, his training clashing with reality. The mall seemed to constrict around them, every sound, the clatter of a child's shoe, the distant hum of music, the chatter of bystanders, amplifying the absurdity of the confrontation. Aaliyah's fingers brushed the edge of her designer handbag, a subtle gesture of composure, while inside she was already calculating how to turn this moment to her advantage. She knew her reputation, her presence, and her ownership of Eclat Designs carried weight. But in that instant, surrounded by uniformed authority and the scrutiny of strangers, it felt like proving that truth was a performance she had to execute flawlessly. By now, a small crowd had gathered just outside Eclat Designs, their eyes darting between the uniformed officers and Aaliyah, whose calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the flustered police. Some shoppers were whispering, others recording on their phones, and the low hum of curiosity and outrage filled the air. Reynolds cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably under the public gaze, while Carter adjusted his belt, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Ma'am, we were called about suspicious activity," Reynolds said again, his voice tight, but there was a subtle edge of defensiveness creeping in. Aaliyah's gaze swept across the boutique, resting on the intricate displays, the polished wooden racks, and the elegant chandelier that hung above, like a quiet symbol of her success. She gestured subtly to a wall-mounted plaque displaying the store's registration and awards. "This is my store," she said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "I think you've made a mistake." Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it, caught between procedure and embarrassment, while Carter's eyes darted toward the crowd, as if hoping the witnesses would vanish and make the awkward moment disappear. Aaliyah's assistant, a young woman named Maya, appeared from the back room, setting down a box of freshly pressed garments. She paused, eyes wide, sensing the tension, and gave Aaliyah a discreet nod. Aaliyah returned it, a silent signal that she was in control. "We just want to ensure everything's fine," Reynolds muttered, though it sounded more like a plea than a statement. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. The officers, tasked with enforcing order, were now the center of scrutiny, their authority undermined by a simple fact. This woman, poised and unflinching, was the legitimate owner of the space. Aaliyah walked slowly toward the counter, her heels echoing softly, each step deliberate, and as she did, murmurs rippled through the onlookers. "I've built this business from the ground up," she said softly, enough for the officers to hear, yet resonating like a declaration of pride to the bystanders. The officers exchanged a glance, Reynolds biting the inside of his cheek, Carter shifting his weight, both realizing that whatever report had triggered this encounter had completely missed the mark. The crowd, sensing the reversal, grew more animated, some whispering, others smirking, while Aaliyah remained serene, commanding the room not through force but through presence, patience, and undeniable legitimacy. Inside the boutique, the atmosphere shifted from mere tension to a palpable sense of scrutiny as Reynolds and Carter followed Aaliyah past racks of shimmering fabrics, their footsteps hesitant against the polished hardwood floor. Aaliyah's presence was magnetic, the kind of quiet authority that made the officers feel simultaneously small and exposed. "You can check with security if you want," she said evenly, gesturing toward a sleek console where the mall's surveillance monitors displayed every corner of the store. "They'll confirm I've been here all morning preparing for the afternoon appointments." Reynolds opened his mouth, then hesitated, as though unsure if insisting would make him appear professional or absurd. Carter's gaze wandered across the boutique, landing on a framed photo near the register showing Aaliyah receiving a local business award for her contributions to the community, a visual testament to her credibility. The crowd outside pressed closer, some whispering to one another, others holding up phones, recording what was quickly turning into a viral moment. Aaliyah moved with deliberate grace, her hands lightly touching the edge of a silk gown, the movement almost cinematic in its calm authority. "We just need to verify," Reynolds began, but Aaliyah cut him off smoothly. "Officer Reynolds, Officer Carter, I understand procedure," she said, her tone polite but firm, "but I assure you everything here is in order, and your suspicion is unfounded. If you need confirmation, call corporate, check our registration, ask security, anything you like. I have nothing to hide." Reynolds' face tightened, a mix of embarrassment and irritation, while Carter shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the gathered witnesses. Aaliyah's assistant, Maya, quietly moved behind the counter, offering the officers bottled water with a courteous smile, subtly reminding them that the boutique ran on professionalism, not intimidation. The contrast was stark. Here was a woman commanding respect through composure and evidence, while the officers, symbols of authority, felt increasingly like the spectacle themselves. Aaliyah's calm gaze met Reynolds briefly, steady and unwavering, and in that instant, the power dynamic was undeniable. He had assumed dominance at the start, but now it was her poise, preparation, and quiet insistence on truth that held the room captive. The hum of the air conditioning, the soft clatter of hangers, and the whispered murmurs of shoppers outside combined into a quiet symphony that underscored the irony. Authority had been misapplied, and yet justice, in its subtle form, was already asserting itself within these walls. The murmurs outside the boutique had grown louder, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and indignation as shoppers crowded closer to the glass walls, phones raised, capturing every moment of the unfolding confrontation. Inside, Aaliyah stood near the center of the store, her posture relaxed yet commanding, while Reynolds and Carter shuffled uneasily, their earlier confidence eroded by both the truth and the silent judgment of onlookers. "Ma'am," Reynolds said finally, voice strained, "we just have to follow up on reports. People saw someone acting suspiciously." His words faltered under the weight of Aaliyah's steady gaze, and Carter shifted from foot to foot, clearly wishing the ground would swallow him up. Aaliyah tilted her head slightly, the calm in her expression almost disarming. "Suspicious?" she asked softly, the single word cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "I've been preparing for today's appointments. Staff, shipments, client meetings, everything has been scheduled, confirmed, and executed. Every action in this store is accounted for." Maya, her assistant, moved quietly to Aaliyah's side, holding a clipboard filled with schedules and delivery confirmations, offering the officers an unmistakable visual of legitimacy. Reynolds glanced at the documents, then back at Aaliyah, clearly realizing that no amount of vague suspicion could override the proof before him. The crowd outside shifted restlessly, some whispering, others nodding in recognition of the injustice they were witnessing. Aaliyah's voice, calm but unwavering, continued. "I respect your role, officers, but your assumption here was baseless. If you truly need confirmation, the mall's security team or corporate offices can verify my ownership." Carter's hands fidgeted at his belt, his eyes darted toward the crowd, which had now started murmuring louder, the whispers amplified by the sense of social accountability. Reynolds cleared his throat, his earlier authority crumbling into awkward hesitancy. Aaliyah's presence filled the room, commanding attention not through aggression but through the undeniable combination of professionalism, preparation, and quiet confidence. The officers were caught in a moment they hadn't anticipated. The woman they had approached with suspicion was not only innocent of any wrongdoing, but fully in charge of the space they had assumed she didn't belong in. Outside, the crowd leaned in closer, the atmosphere electric, a shared understanding passing between strangers that they were witnessing the dismantling of an unfounded assumption in real time. While inside, Aaliyah's poise and unshakable calm made it clear who truly held authority in her own store.
By mid-afternoon, the boutique felt almost like a stage, the polished floors reflecting the scattered sunlight and the growing cluster of onlookers pressed against the glass walls, their whispered comments now audible murmurs of indignation. Reynolds and Carter stood awkwardly near the center of Eclat Designs, both officers acutely aware that the spectacle had shifted from suspicion to embarrassment, the authority they had assumed now teetering on the edge of ridicule. Aaliyah moved gracefully between the racks, picking up a carefully folded silk blouse and holding it up for a customer browsing nearby, demonstrating an effortless ownership of the space. "I've been managing deliveries, appointments, and client consultations all morning," she said, her voice calm, measured, but carrying the undeniable weight of authority. "Every action here has been planned, every transaction accounted for. You can verify this yourself with security or corporate, anything you need." Reynolds swallowed, attempting to regain composure, but the realization in his eyes betrayed him. The narrative he had been working from, the implicit assumption that she didn't belong here, had been completely wrong. Carter's hands trembled slightly at his belt, his attempts to maintain professionalism failing under the scrutiny of the crowd and Aaliyah's composed demeanor. Aaliyah's assistant, Maya, quietly handed the officers a folder filled with records of shipments, client appointments, and employee schedules, a tangible proof of the hours of preparation and hard work that went unseen but were undeniable. Outside, a young woman recorded the scene on her phone, muttering to a friend, "Can you believe they questioned the owner?" The comment rippled through the crowd like wildfire, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement. Reynolds cleared his throat, finally meeting Aaliyah's gaze, and in that brief moment the power dynamic crystallized. The officers had been wrong, and the woman before them, unflinching and composed, was the rightful authority in her space. Aaliyah's posture remained calm, her expression neutral but firm, demonstrating that professionalism, preparation, and self-assuredness could dismantle assumptions and command respect, even in the most awkward and unjust circumstances. The boutique, once simply a place of business, had become a stage for accountability, a vivid illustration of the collision between bias and reality, while the officers, caught between procedure and embarrassment, silently acknowledged the mistake they had made under the watchful eyes of both witnesses and the woman who owned the space they had underestimated.
The tension inside Eclat Designs began to shift subtly, the officers' initial rigidity giving way to awkward attempts at decorum as the crowd outside murmured and shuffled with growing curiosity. Reynolds adjusted his cap nervously, glancing at Carter, whose unease was palpable, the earlier assertiveness completely drained. Aaliyah, however, remained composed, her posture relaxed but authoritative, moving through the boutique as if the confrontation had barely disturbed the rhythm of her day. Maya, her assistant, quietly organized a display nearby, her eyes flicking toward the officers with a mixture of concern and restrained satisfaction. "I'll step aside while you verify," Aaliyah said, gently but firmly, indicating the folder of schedules, deliveries, and security logs resting on the counter. Reynolds hesitated, clearly struggling to reconcile procedure with the undeniable truth before him, while Carter's gaze swept across the crowd, sensing that social accountability had already begun to take hold. Outside, bystanders whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others gesturing to phones, the energy charged with a mixture of disbelief and solidarity. Aaliyah's calm command of the space was mirrored by her presence in the eyes of the witnesses, who seemed to unconsciously step back and allow her authority to dominate. "We will verify," Reynolds said, finally, his voice tight, every word carrying the weight of reluctant admission.
Aaliyah nodded slightly, a controlled smile curving her lips as she guided a customer toward a fitting room with quiet assurance, demonstrating that business, professionalism, and composure could coexist even in the midst of public scrutiny and personal affront. Carter lingered near the register, hands clasped in front of him, while Reynolds shuffled paperwork nervously, clearly feeling the dual pressure of professional obligation and personal embarrassment. The boutique itself, with its soft lighting, carefully curated displays, and the subtle scent of fresh fabrics, contrasted sharply with the awkward energy of the officers, who seemed increasingly out of place in a space they had assumed they could command. Aaliyah moved back toward the center of the store, her gaze briefly meeting Reynolds, steady and unflinching, silently communicating that she had weathered far greater challenges than this, that her authority was rooted in hard work and resilience, and that no assumption, no matter how confidently voiced, could undermine the reality she had built brick by brick. The crowd outside sensed it too, the quiet victory of competence and truth over assumption, witnessed in real time, leaving the officers isolated in their misjudgment, while Aaliyah stood at the center, serene, unshaken, and fully in control of the situation she had long mastered.
By late afternoon, the crowd outside the boutique had swelled, forming a loose semicircle around the glass walls, phones raised, murmurs of disbelief and admiration rippling through the shoppers. Inside, Reynolds and Carter remained awkwardly near the entrance, glancing repeatedly at Aaliyah, whose composed posture and calm expression made it painfully clear who truly held authority in the store. "We've verified your ownership with mall security," Reynolds said finally, his voice tight, almost apologetic, though his words carried a faint, unspoken resentment at the exposure of his mistake. Aaliyah nodded, her expression unreadable but composed, moving gracefully between racks as if the officer's presence were now background noise rather than a threat. Maya adjusted a display nearby, keeping an eye on the visitors while subtly signaling support for Aaliyah's handling of the situation. The officers shifted uneasily, and Carter muttered something under his breath about reporting back, but even he couldn't hide the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on them. Outside, shoppers whispered, some exchanging sympathetic glances, others shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. Inside, Aaliyah's presence remained commanding, the boutique alive with warmth, light, and the subtle hum of resilience, a space fully hers, untouchable by the bias that had briefly tried to overshadow it. "Thank you for verifying," she said softly, not loud enough to be confrontational, but firm enough to reclaim the center of authority. Reynolds swallowed, clearing his throat, then gave a stiff nod, acknowledging the reality without fully verbalizing it, while Carter remained silent, hands fidgeting nervously. Aaliyah turned back to her boutique, gesturing gracefully to a mannequin draped in a new collection, as if to remind everyone that life and business continued, unaffected by assumptions or brief confrontations. The soft hum of the store, punctuated by the quiet rustle of fabrics and distant chatter from outside, returned to normal, yet the energy lingered. The officer's mistake had been exposed, the truth had prevailed, and Aaliyah's unshakable calm had turned what could have been humiliation into quiet authority. As Reynolds and Carter stepped toward the exit, their steps hesitant, the crowd's attention followed them, some whispering critiques, others shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. Inside, Aaliyah's presence remained commanding, the boutique alive with warmth, light, and the subtle hum of resilience, a space fully hers, untouchable by the bias that had briefly tried to overshadow it. The mall slowly began to return to its usual rhythm. The buzz of shoppers now tinged with quiet commentary about what had just transpired at Eclair Designs. Outside, whispers and murmurs of admiration followed Aaliyah as she moved confidently through her boutique, checking racks and arranging displays with the precision and care that had always defined her business. Reynolds and Carter lingered for a moment near the entrance, clearly debating whether to leave quietly or assert some form of authority before retreating. But the weight of witnesses and the undeniable proof of Aaliyah's ownership kept them rooted in awkward silence. Maya stood nearby, offering subtle support. a reassuring presence as Aaliyah adjusted the arrangement of a mannequin, her fingers brushing the smooth fabric as naturally as if the confrontation had never occurred. The crowd outside began to disperse, some lingering to peek through the windows, their whispers carrying admiration for the woman who had been targeted yet remained unshakably composed. "You handled that very well," Maya said softly, her voice low enough for only Aaliyah to hear, a small acknowledgement of the tension and grace that had defined the confrontation. Aaliyah smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the boutique with a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that her calm professionalism had turned a moment of unjust scrutiny into a demonstration of authority and control. Reynolds finally cleared his throat, muttered a brief apology that barely reached Aaliyah's ears, and together with Carter, retreated from the store, their presence now a distant echo of the earlier confrontation. The boutique settled into a comfortable quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant chatter of shoppers, and the subtle rustle of fabrics as customers began to browse once more. Aaliyah's gaze lingered on the store's front windows, where the last of the crowd drifted away, some still shaking their heads at the absurdity, others murmuring quietly about the injustice they had witnessed. In that moment, the boutique felt fully hers again, a sanctuary of creativity and control, untouched by bias or misplaced authority. The incident, though brief, had left a ripple, public attention, social awareness, and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had faced scrutiny, remained composed, and emerged fully in command of her space.
With the officers finally gone and the crowd dissipating, the boutique settled into a calm rhythm, sunlight streaming through the glass doors, illuminating the rows of carefully arranged garments and accessories. Aaliyah moved slowly through the space, her hands brushing the fabric of a new silk dress, the soft rustle echoing like a quiet affirmation of ownership. Maya followed, tidying displays and greeting a few lingering customers who had stayed behind, their whispers of admiration barely audible but carrying an unmistakable weight. Aaliyah paused near the counter, taking a deep breath, the tension of the earlier confrontation slowly ebbing from her shoulders. She glanced at the framed photos on the wall, award ceremonies, fashion shows, community events, all reminders of the dedication, vision, and countless hours of work that had built Eclat Designs from the ground up. The incident with the officers had been jarring, but it had not shaken her. If anything, it reinforced the value of calm confidence, preparation, and unwavering professionalism. She walked to the front of the boutique, adjusting the window display with practiced ease, her eyes scanning the now empty corridor outside, the quiet hum of the mall resuming its normal pace. Aaliyah's phone buzzed on the counter, a notification from social media alerting her to the growing attention the incident had garnered online, videos, comments, and shares spreading the story of the confrontation and her poised handling of it. She smiled faintly, acknowledging the irony that a moment of unfair scrutiny had become a public demonstration of her authority and grace. Maya approached, carrying a fresh box of samples, and Aaliyah nodded, signaling that the day would continue as planned, appointments and deliveries uninterrupted by the earlier chaos. The boutique, bathed in soft afternoon light, felt more alive than ever, a space of creativity, control, and resilience, where every garment, every rack, and every detail reflected Aaliyah's dedication. The officers' brief intrusion had faded into memory, their assumptions and mistakes a distant echo against the tangible reality of ownership, competence, and professionalism. And as Aaliyah moved toward the back room to prepare for her next client, the boutique stood as a quiet testament to her presence, unshakable, unassailable, and fully hers, a space where bias could never define the truth, and where authority, earned and practiced, reigned quietly but absolutely.